So here's how we're going to present this today. Hildy is going to start us off with some background and overview information about the Smart Policing Initiative. I'm going to introduce 3 key components to smart policing that we want you to be thinking about. You see them right there: utilization of data, intelligence-led policing, and organizational change. We'll talk a little bit about some case studies of research outcomes in several of our sites, because we think it's very important for the smart policing sites to understand what the end result is that we're looking for in terms of research. Then we'll talk for a little bit. We'll go back to Hildy to talk about the upcoming meeting and how you can best prepare and participate in that meeting. I'll say a few words about that in a minute. And Vivian will talk a little bit about the Smart Policing website. I know some of you have been to the website. If you haven't, we strongly encourage it. It's becoming one of our major ways that we convey information and provide opportunities for smart policing sites to collaborate and have some peer-to-peer interaction. So that's the agenda for today. I want to say just a word or two about the recent news that we got from BJA regarding the meeting on the 7th and 8th. I know it's been a bit of a frustration and a bit of a challenge for everybody. I just want you to understand that there are new meeting review and approval procedures actually at the Department of Justice, even above the Bureau of Justice Assistance level. And many of us grantees are being put through a very long, elaborate, intrusive, inquisitive process about every meeting that we hold. This meeting is fairly substantial and involves a lot of people and a lot of sites, so DOJ took an inordinately long time to review every aspect of this meeting, and they didn't officially approve the meeting until yesterday morning. So we appreciate your patience as we work through the details of this new procedure. I think it's the name of the game at Justice for the foreseeable future, so other meetings that we have will have similar difficulties, but we're working with it as best as we can. We consider this meeting a terribly important meeting. As you can imagine, it's the first time that we're having an opportunity to meet with the 16 funded sites. This is the time it's like an inauguration or a launching, and there's important information that we want all the sites to get, regardless of the size of their jurisdiction or the type of problem they're working on or the level of expertise and experience they have in any of a number of different areas. It's a very important time also for you to meet your colleagues and to have some interaction with your peers around the country about your plans and problems you're encountering, how to resolve them, some creative solutions to the challenges that are presented to you along the way. So we take the notion of this peer-to-peer interaction and the development of what we call the smart policing community very seriously, and we begin that whole process really with this first meeting. And it's also going to be an opportunity for all of us to take a look at the plans that you initially submitted to the Bureau of Justice Assistance to receive the funding that you have. And in the light of some of the information that we're going to give you today and give you at that meeting, we're going to ask that you take a first look at maybe rethinking some aspects of your plans. So we can focus an awful lot at that meeting on the plans that you have. Hildy will talk more about that a little bit later. That's pretty much the agenda. Again, a lot to do in a short amount of time. I want to turn this over to Hildy now to start with some background information on smart policing. Okay?
Thank you, Chip. Well, welcome everybody to Smart Policing, and good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at. I'm in Arizona, so it's morning for me. But we're going to spend the next couple of minutes talking about what smart policing is, what it means to implement it locally, but also as part of a national effort to move policing to a new paradigm. Smart policing is much more than a grant program. It's an effort to challenge police departments to become complete organizations. Now, what do we mean by this word complete? Well, there are multiple aspects to this. We mean being both strategic and science-based, understanding crime in your community based on sound, detailed data and analysis, setting the priorities, developing tightly focused solutions that are both measurable and promote accountability. But we also mean developing new and improved data and intelligence systems and promoting them as critical tools for crime prevention and enforcement. We also mean understanding and using technology to support your policing strategies as well as tactics. We mean developing partnerships and leveraging those collaborative opportunities with stakeholders at all levels within the department, agencies outside the department, as well as community members and organizations to ensure you get the support you need to succeed. And finally, we mean the complete police organization as a learning organization, one that can change and adapt as new and more productive and more accountable approaches to crime are piloted, assessed, and proved to be successful. Next slide. So is smart policing really new? Well, the answer is both yes and no. Over the last 10 to 20 years, you want to go back one slide, Vivian? There you go. Over the last 10 to 20 years, there have been a number of new law enforcement initiatives that have had a significant impact on the field and were also supported at the national level. You know most of them: problem-oriented policing, community policing, intelligence-led policing, CompStat, SACSI, PSN. We've learned from each of these new endeavors. And for smart policing, we're fortunate because we can take the best of the elements from these past initiatives, but then we've added a few others that are critically important. The use of technology, a focus on research for results, the need for cost-benefit analysis, and the need for formalized research partnerships. So taken together, all of these elements make up smart policing. Next slide. But really, the concepts behind smart policing are not new by any means. You probably saw in the pre-reading that was sent to you just before this webinar. In CNA's white paper on smart policing, there are 9 principles of policing that Sir Robert Peel put forward. And he put those forward almost 200 years ago. Now, these principles are still of major consequence today and actually underpin smart policing. We put 3 of those Peel's principles up on the slide today, and these provide good examples of their overall relevance and importance to today's policing. That being the mission is still preventing crime and disorder. The ability of police to perform their duties is dependent upon public approval of police action. Still very important. And the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder, not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with it. And smart policing focuses on the need for departments to be ready to change and adapt, just as crime, community, and criminals do, depending on the environment and the various circumstances. Now, this dynamic process means departments must be looking ahead at all times, understanding the environment and the impact of changes on crime and communities, and be ready for new ways to solve crime, as well as understand if these strategies succeed or not. In other words, police agencies have to be smart. Next slide. So with all of that in mind, here are the goals of smart policing, what we're trying to accomplish in this program. We've asked the selected sites to pilot and test innovative policing strategies and tactics regarding both offender-based and place-based policing that are foremost effective and efficient use of resources and economical. Now, this is challenging work. So along with the process, the selected sites are being strongly supported with a comprehensive array of training and technical assistance resources. The overall purpose is to help you, the selected sites, be successful. Now, CNA Corporation has a management team, of which Chip Coldren is the project director, which oversees the training and technical assistance. Next slide. So let's talk about the kinds of training and technical assistance available. Now, many of you have been exposed to some of these already. Over the last few years, we've held a number of national meetings, and all of you new sites will be coming together for the purpose of not only training, but peer-to-peer assistance on February 7th and 8th. Now, we also have held a series of webinars over the last year with our subject matter experts as facilitators, and all sites and any other interested parties being welcome to participate. The subjects have ranged from outreach and collaboration to research issues to offender notification meetings to targeting offenders. Now, all these webinars are taped and available for viewing at any time at one's convenience through the Smart Policing website. So I hope you'll take advantage and use some of these past webinars, but we'll also be providing an array of new webinars specifically for you, the new sites, and those will be coming online in the near future. We also have short briefs on specific topics and other products like a quarterly newsletter available on our Smart Policing website. These products will give you insights and allow you to tap into the expertise of our subject matter experts, as well as learn about what other SPI sites are doing as they move along in their process. And we also monitor the progress of your initiative and can assist with any difficulties you might be experiencing. We do this by having our subject matter experts contact you on a regular basis, monthly initially and then perhaps bi-monthly, to learn about the progress you're making, any issues or challenges you might be experiencing, but also to identify some success stories you're having and lessons learned that may be beneficial to other sites and departments. So you'll be hearing from the SMEs in the very near future. Next slide. So if you or any particular site is experiencing some particular difficulties or could benefit from some outside expertise, we will provide individualized assistance. This really comes in a few forms. The first is through our subject matter experts, who can explore in-depth issues with your team through phone calls or email, and also if warranted, an on-site visit. Second, assistance could come through peer-to-peer collaboration. For example, recently the Boston site visited the Memphis site for a day where they each learned from the other and really greatly benefited from the experience. And again, our website is chock full of information, reports, newsletters, research briefs, and other things that can inform you about a myriad of issues and about each of the 32 old and new Smart Policing sites. Next slide. So let me give you a feel for the sites that have come before you and that you may want to get to know. Now, the first SPI sites came on board in 2009, and there were 10 of them. Violence was the predominant issue, but some focused on other issues, such as Glendale, which focused on theft in convenience stores, Memphis, which focused on robbery and burglary, Palm Beach, which focused on robbery within the Guatemalan immigrant community, and Reno, which focused on prescription drug abuse. Next slide. And in Phase 2, which you'll see on this next slide, an additional 6 sites came on board in 2010. And here are some examples there. Baltimore focuses on gun violence and the use of a novel strategy, a gun offender registry. Indio is examining burglary and its relationship to juvenile truancy. And San Diego is looking at issues with the Somali community. So you see there's really a wide range of experiences to learn from. Next slide. So in the 2 years of this program, there have clearly been some challenges to implementation as well. These are the areas we'll be exploring at the national meetings and through webinars and other types of assistance. But in a nutshell, these challenges concern the following. First, innovation. So are what sites implementing truly innovative? Well, we can define innovation in many different ways, but what's important is that we learn from our evidence-based practices or what's been done before that's worked in some circumstances, and perhaps push the envelope, change the game a bit, implement it in a new way or a new environment, or find a way to generate new value for your department or for the citizens of your community. Second, conducting research for results. Now, this is challenging mainly because we're asking for a new form of partnership between the researcher and the department, something much more comprehensive than what's been expected in previous initiatives. The use and implementation of new technology can also be challenging. Sustainability of new programs is always challenging, and it's no different with smart policing. But because of its importance, we'll be talking much more about sustainability and how you can address it up front in your initiative. Cost-effectiveness analysis. Now, this may sound a bit daunting, but understanding the cost of various strategies and their outcomes may be just what's needed to get your initiative accepted in all levels of your department and in all levels of your local government. And, of course, sharing the results. Are we actually getting results that are useful, writing them up in a way that's easily understood, sharing them in a timely way with those individuals who can really make a difference? All key questions and all challenges. So with that, let me turn this back over to Chip for a more in-depth look at some of the things I've just raised. Chip?
Okay, thank you, Hildy. This is Chip again. I'm going to start a kind of an overview of the three of the key components to smart policing. As I mentioned before, utilization of data, intelligence-led policing, and organizational change. I want to take a moment and explain a couple things. Number one, I forgot to mention during my introductory remarks that at the close of this webinar, Vivian will send to each of you an evaluation form, so you have a chance to assess how this session went, what you thought about it, how they might go better in the future. But it's also an opportunity, as Hildy alluded to suggest other types of webinars, other topics, other forms of assistance or information that you think are going to be particularly helpful to you. So I just ask you to pay careful attention to that when it comes your way. I thought I might also just stop briefly and ask if anybody has a question at this point about smart policing concept generally and what Hildy has presented.
During this meeting, are we going to be required to put on presentations?
At the meeting, no. No, you're going to be working either with your team or working with representatives from other jurisdictions to kind of digest and see how the information we're presenting might apply to your site. But you're not required to do a presentation unless you've been asked to already. And I think at this meeting, some of our prior sites are making presentations, but we're not asking a lot of the current sites to. Unless you want to. I should add that we make use of podcasts on our website, so you will get, when you arrive at the meeting, a schedule of very brief sessions. So we're going to ask at least one representative from your team to film a podcast about your plans and your strategy, and that will come along with a couple questions to consider before you come to the meeting, so you're prepared for that session. So we do ask you to take 5 minutes out of the agenda at different times and go to a separate room and film a podcast that we can put that up on our website. That does happen at the meeting, okay? Anybody else? Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about these three key components: utilizing data, intelligence-led policing, and organizational change. I want to stress at this point that these are not the only critical components or key components to smart policing that we talk about. There are a host of others, such as strategic planning, utilization of technology, as we've talked about already, outreach and collaboration, problem-oriented policing and place-based approaches to crime prevention, as well as offender-focused efforts. So we will address these at the upcoming meeting and at other meetings and at other webinars and in other ways as you move forward with your projects. I picked these three because we only have time for a few, and I'd like to give you an idea of kind of the approach that we take to some of these issues and the level of detail that we get to and the kinds of things that we're looking for or hoping that that smart policing sites will be engaged in regarding these key components. So let's start with data utilization. As you've heard and as you'll hear quite frequently, a lot of smart policing has to do with data analysis and outcome evaluation and performance assessment of various kinds. That requires that all of our sites become quite adept at accessing data of various kinds, analyzing data of various kinds, and putting them to good use. So we do take time to focus on just what do we mean by this and just how are some of our sites doing this. As you can imagine, this goes beyond taking the path of least resistance and just using the data that you have readily available at your fingertips to analyze a problem or build a strategy. So we look for non-police data, we look for data from other parts of the justice system, we look for data from other communities, and we hope that our sites are engaged in deliberate efforts to collect and analyze new data, maybe data in new formats or data that has been integrated with other data that hasn't been before, and again, as we say, look at some non-traditional sources. We also talk about the processes through which these data are reviewed and analyzed and interpreted. So we like the term co-interpreting. When you have a collaboration working on a crime problem and you take your data and lay it out for the group to see, well, you get different interpretations. And what you thought the data was telling you initially may not be what you end up agreeing that it's telling you at some point in the future because of this co-interpretation. We'll refer to this next point several times as well. Even if you're a police department that is functioning extremely efficiently and being extremely successful at crime reduction and crime suppression, nothing ever stays the same. And the internal and external environments that you operate in are extremely dynamic. That requires that people working on these teams and people in your agencies be on a constant monitoring of information from various sources, again, internal and external to the department. That's what we mean by data utilization. And information technology, how to access the information, how to integrate it, how to merge it in different ways, analytic options and routines are all changing rapidly as well. So for a lot of different reasons, it's very important to focus on just how we access and use data, separate from some of the other things that we do. This next slide is one that was prepared for one of our sessions by Scott Decker, who's one of our subject matter experts out of Arizona as well. And so he just created this nice design that shows the different sources and the different levels at which you can look for information. Internal police information systems, information from other justice agency systems, local, federal, probation, gang intelligence task forces, then looking out to other institutions and other sectors, health, hospitals, education, public housing, transportation. You'll find a number of our sites actually becoming fairly adept at looking at these kinds of systems as they continue their crime analysis, their problem analysis, and actually their outcome evaluation. There are also some opportunities that you can take advantage of since you're connected with a researcher to maybe find other research that's going on in your jurisdiction or in other jurisdictions that you can take advantage of. Sometimes you may even be able to have a question or two that's pertinent to your project added on to an ongoing research effort. So we like to stress that the information that's available to you that we hope that you're looking for is available at multiple levels from multiple sources. There are many, many different possibilities for analysis here. And we don't present this as a mandate that you do all of this all of the time, but that you be mindful of these different opportunities, be open to looking at them, and be somewhat creative in how you do that. Next slide, please. So a couple thoughts about how our sites have been merging data resources. I think it's fairly common in a lot of jurisdictions these days to merge arrest and probation records. This helps identify who the most prolific offenders are, who that small group of offenders is that's causing the most time and expense to the system and the most harm to the community. These kinds of lists are often linked to what are referred to as lever pulling sessions, or the call-ins that we did a webinar about recently. They help you monitor any targeted offenders better. And I like to point out that especially in the early stages, if you start to merge records between police and parole and probation, or even with other systems like education, you start to learn a lot about the deficiencies in your systems and ways that you can improve not only access or analysis, but accuracy of your information. So merging different data systems produces benefits in a number of different ways. It's fairly common also for some of our sites and for other jurisdictions around the country to work on what Scott Decker calls the WOW lists, worst of the worst, targeted offender lists, and sometimes the police develop them, sometimes the police develop them and share them with other collaborators and come to a more of a consensus approach to who should be on the list or who should be taken off of a list or what kind of procedures you might put in to determine when somebody gets on or off the list. So again, we get back to this notion of co-interpreting the data. Once you involve other partners and other collaborators in this, you end up with sometimes slightly, sometimes radically new perspectives on the problem that you thought you were facing in the first place. Some of our sites have taken advantage of centers that already exist. They're commonly called real-time crime centers. They have them in Boston and Memphis and some other places. Sometimes the smart policing sites actually become the hub for putting these information systems in one place. Sometimes they call it the war room, where in one place you can access call, tip information and probation information and arrest information and offender information. So sometimes our smart policing sites become rather central in these kinds of efforts. And some of our sites become involved in working with new database integrators, new software that's available for mining and analyzing very large data sets. If you haven't heard about it already, the Los Angeles site has come across a new product called Palantir. It's a very, very flexible and open architecture kind of a system that allows the crime analysts pretty much in real time to draw data from about 8 different systems that are of a very qualitative and a very quantitative nature, and they can do their analysis pulling from these different systems pretty much on the fly. As their thought process is going, they sit down at this system and they do this analysis. So it's getting rather sophisticated, and you can learn more about that as we go forward with this project. In terms of data collection, I'm on the next slide now. As I said before, many of our sites take advantage of existing systems or existing data collection systems that exist and get to add some variables or some questions onto those. I'm not sure it's fairly common, although this is an idea that's taken off in a couple of our sites. Again, this comes from a lot of the work that Scott Decker has done in terms of actually talking to offenders, and more than just for intelligence debriefings, but as a researcher doing focus groups with offenders and finding out more than you might have known before about their motivations for doing certain things and how they operate, how they pick their targets and that kind of thing. So some of our sites find themselves involved in focus groups of a number of different kinds. It was pretty popular with some of the Project Safe Neighborhood initiatives and some of the strategic approaches to community safety initiatives. Scott often talks about what I call medical rounds, but these are violent or homicide case reviews where you'll have a multidisciplinary team that convenes every week or every 2 weeks or every month looks at all the serious incidents that have taken place in the area that you're concerned about or in the group of offenders that you're concerned about, and does a very thorough review of everything that anybody can think of that's related to that particular case, so the entire team is aware of what's going on. And it's turned out to be quite an effective consensus builder around strategies and tactics to use once you have picked these targets. Sometimes our researchers will get involved in systematic or social observations where they'll actually go out into the field and collect information. We find this common when sites pick strategies and approaches that have to do with quality of life issues and problem-oriented policing and that kind of thing. So that's just a couple thoughts about how some of our sites are approaching this data utilization issue. We also like to say, next slide please, that you have to be careful about this. In your exhaustive and never-ending search for information from different systems and of different kinds, you also have to find parsimony. Right? You have to look for that manageable array of systems and variables and tabulations that you can access and that are useful to you without drowning in too much information and too much information that's not of much use. I think it's fairly common today, I know in my little world it is, to talk about a dashboard. So where you might at some point get to a stage where you have identified 6 or 7 or 10 key performance indicators or outcome indicators that you're going to pay attention to for the next 18 months. And so you build those into a little feedback loop into the team so everybody's looking at the same information. That's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about parsimony. Okay, so let's just take a minute here. I'd like to have anybody talk a little bit about if there's any kind of new or unusual or innovative things that you're thinking about. I don't imagine that you've implemented them yet, in terms of looking for data to help you analyze your problem or monitor the effectiveness of your project. Anybody? So how many projects out there, is there anybody out there who actually has on the books plans for new data collection as part of this initiative?
In New Haven, we'll be collecting new data, but again, the new data is the old data. We're just bringing it in and synthesizing it. Again, we've worked with the probation and parole. We're working with housing. The idea actually has to do more with something you haven't gotten into a real lot, and that's analysis. The idea of taking complex information and making it simpler to digest by, for example, using GIS, layering information that comes in from disparate sources, and seeing if there's commonality. Okay, so that's maybe not something that's new under the sun, but it's something new for New Haven at this point in time. Anybody else?
Chip, this is Bill Souza in Las Vegas. This is Bill Souza in Las Vegas. What we're doing, among other things, we'll be collecting observations with police officers with the idea in mind that to get away from the black box sort of evaluation and more or less analyze what it is the police are doing when they're doing the problem-solving activities.
Good. That's actually something that's been done with a good deal of success in several other sites. I'd also like to point out something new that came up in one of our sites that you'll hear from at the meeting, Lowell, Massachusetts. They've actually undertaken kind of a web-based survey initiative where every 2 weeks the officers that are working on the focused initiatives are given an opportunity just to register their thoughts and opinions. So they have kind of an ongoing monitoring of how the officers who have been trained and who have been tasked with these new initiatives to just talk about what they're doing and how they're doing it and how things are going. So they're kind of monitoring organizational change and the extent to which how the smart policing initiative is being integrated into the department. So it's a very creative process. It's very open-ended. We just ask that you think seriously, maybe think a little more than you have in the past, about different ways that you can access and utilize data. So thanks for those comments. Let's go on to component number 2 here, which is intelligence-led policing. I know that some of you are knowledgeable about this and engaged in intelligence-led policing initiatives, but probably everybody is not. And I can tell you that I know when BJA put the Smart Policing Initiative together, this was one of their starting points. They're very familiar with what's happened over in England and the British Home Office with intelligence-led policing. Some of you will be familiar with Jerry Ratcliffe's name, who's done a fair amount of writing in this area. He's also the research partner attached to the Philadelphia Smart Policing Initiative. So we have the benefit of his expertise and some of his work in intelligence-led policing. So a lot of what I present here comes from information that he's presented at prior meetings. And again, if you've been through all this, I apologize, but we think it's important for everybody to hear just a bit about this issue. So I think, you know, when Jerry talks about and when he writes about intelligence-led policing, he makes it a point to distinguish between data, information, and analysis. And this, I think, this is fairly commonsensical. Data are individual facts that you know, are collected from various sources in the course of doing the work that we do. Data becomes information when it's structured some way or when somebody identifies some patterns and actually tells somebody else about it. Information becomes analysis when it's utilized in such a way and it's presented in such a way that it's considered actionable. And so that's a term that I've really taken to. I like this term actionable. In my mind, you know, if you're collecting information and providing it to other people and it's not pertinent to very specific tactics or strategies, then it's not that useful. So when people get involved in intelligence-led policing efforts, they talk an awful lot about intelligence products and intelligence packets. So they're looking for very specific information that's going to help the people, mostly the police, but not just the police, but mostly the police who are working on these very specific targets or very specific areas or very specific problems. It gets them information rapidly in usable formats that helps them make decisions and take action. Okay, so it's very close to the ground, it's very fast-paced, and I kind of distinguish that from other types of research and analysis that goes on in policing. Let's go to the next slide. This is just a little bit of a reminder that there's a history that goes back to the United Kingdom in terms of the development of intelligence-led policing. This first bullet refers to the fact that it helps prioritize police response to calls based on prevalence and seriousness as opposed to rapid response time. So in my view, this immediately makes us think again about analysis. If you're collecting information from the officer on the street and you want to convey that information to somebody else in a way that it helps people understand prevalence and seriousness, not just in such a way that you always respond in the most rapid fashion, you have to inject more analysis into the information that you're collecting, into the data you're collecting, and you have to conduct that analysis and turn it around and get it back to the people who need it rather quickly. And we always talk, it's not just tactical information and tactical decisions that we're talking about, but intelligence-led policing has us also thinking about maybe a step up in aggregation to some of these more strategic initiatives that we're taking. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is also from Jerry Ratcliffe's material. When I look at this, this is his description of an intelligence process, and he's making the point that collecting intelligence is not just a single act, but it's an organizational process that, again, needs to be paid attention to. So if you think about, you know, making some plans and setting some direction in your organization or for smart policing, eventually you get to the point where you start to collect intelligence information. Right? Then you get to processing and collating it, analyzing it, disseminating it, seeing how people use it, seeing how people react to it, and reevaluating whether it's helpful to you in the tactics and strategies that you have chosen. So I'd like to make a couple of points here. In my view, right now, these new smart policing projects are at that first point, doing some planning and setting some direction. To get to the point where you're collecting information and processing it and analyzing it in a fairly rapid fashion, it's going to take a little time, and we don't expect you to do that right away. But this whole process, especially if you come from the research community, looks like a research process. We go through very similar processes when we build a new theory and we test it. Right? We collect information, we analyze it, we reevaluate it to see if our theories are correct. And so I think about, when I look at this chart, I think about intelligence-led policing as a development and testing of local theory about very specific crime problems that you're addressing. Again, factoring in that you want to collect and analyze this information and turn it around very quickly. So the supervisors and officers that are responsible for working on this problem get the benefit of it right away, not waiting for the researchers to do their outcome analysis and produce a report at some later time. Let's go to the next slide. I think this is an important slide too. This talks about the role of analysis and the role of the analyst in intelligence-led policing. And the way it's written by Jerry Ratcliffe and others, the analyst is in a real central position in intelligence-led policing. They're the people who are, I guess, collecting information, or information is being provided to them. They're the ones doing the analysis and actually interpreting the meaning in the data and how it relates to, whatever the criminal problem or the crime problem that they're addressing. It's the analyst who is in the driver's seat in terms of making recommendations to decision makers on, right, how to act, what decisions to make based on that information. And it's the decision makers who are executing or making these actionable decisions based on the analysis. So in the intelligence-led policing world, I think more so than a lot of us are accustomed to, the analyst plays a very central role. They're kind of in the driver's seat, and I can just tell you from my experience, I don't go to many police departments where the analyst has that kind of a role. But agencies who take intelligence-led policing seriously are supposed to be looking at the skills and the training and the role and the functioning of the analyst in this whole process. Next slide, please. Okay, this takes us back to this term actionable. So we know that intelligence is actionable when a number of things happen. Right? When the analysis is helpful in bringing what we think are disparate or unrelated pieces of information together to help understand problems better. I think there's some interesting work on this going along in a couple of our sites that are doing these DDAX projects where they're looking at the relationship between crime and traffic problems. Fascinating. We don't always assume that those are related, but I'm now learning through my contact with several sites that there's some very interesting connections here. So good intelligence-led policing will help you make that connection or lead you toward that connection more than other types of analysis would. Clearly, we want the intelligence to help explain the nature and extent of the crime problem, but we want it to go further than that. We want to understand better the theory, the explanations for why these problems are happening or what the motivations of these offenders are. That takes a fair amount of pretty focused intelligence work to get to that level of detail. When you get there, not only does it help you understand the problem, but it helps you understand risks and threats. Clearly, this is a direct link to officer safety, right? When we're targeting on the most violent offenders or the most violent communities or the most serious problems, we're sending our teams into the most dangerous areas. And so you want your intelligence to be helping you keep these people safe and making the best decisions possible about how to deploy them and how to guide them in what they're doing when they're on the scene. It helps identify strategic targets. It helps inform intervention strategies. helps us anticipate criminal activities, and if we're thorough and comprehensive about this, at some point in time, this intelligence analysis will help us create new indicators and new measures of the effectiveness of the work that we're doing. Okay, let's stop and think about this for a minute. I'd like someone, maybe one or two, to just talk a little bit about the role that the crime analyst is anticipated to play in your smart policing initiative.
Edward, Evans County, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
What we do is entirely different from traditional intelligence. The sheriff employs a full-time analyst in a 12-officer department. We're in the rural agency. And what our analyst does is all of the above of what you talked about. But what his job is to identify threats, short-term tactical threats, long-term strategic threats, in two areas, order maintenance and in violations of the law. Then his job is to determine what strategies the sheriff can put into place to mitigate those threats. Thus, our whole job here is to prevent crime from ever happening. Our whole mission is to not have an arrest to begin with. And we've been very successful through collaborations and through this type of analysis process among all the criminal justice stakeholders and social stakeholders to try to take care of it before it ever happens. That's kind of where we are and where we're kind of different. We're not a traditional investigative look at the information with intelligence. We're more of a predictive intelligence.
Yeah, thank you. Can you, if you don't mind my asking, how long has this analyst been in place in your agency?
Since 2008.
2008?
2009. We were benefactors of the stimulus grants for rural policing, and that's when the sheriff went to a full ILP program here.
Oh, very good. And has the analyst had any special training in this area?
Yes, that's really the problem I see around the state and from talking to other people around the country. If the analysts are not trained in 28 CFR 23, and if, moreover, if there's not good, solid written policies, and they're trained on and they're enforced, you get in trouble real quick. It's kind of analogous to drug enforcement. When the Burn Grant first started in the 80s, and we saw task forces get in trouble all over the country with evidence rooms and investigative funds, there's a lot of stuff going on, like the Occupied Wall Street stuff, that have no business in an intelligence base. And if the training's not there, this can be a huge liability. So he went to, we've had him in Fiat School with Dr. Carter at Michigan State. Program was outstanding program for training. We made sure that the training was in place before we ever started the program or opened up our database.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Anybody else kind of looking at intelligence-led policing as a core focus of their strategy? Okay. Let's go to organizational change. Okay, we focus on organizational change in smart policing for a couple different reasons. We know that the introduction of any new initiative, especially if it's of any size or if it has any level of success, is going to introduce some sort of change. Even if it's just a reaction to what you're doing, just by doing what you're doing, there's going to be some changes that occur, and it's always a good idea to think about them and anticipate them before you get too far down the line. There are some times where we know that some change has to happen in the organization if our initiatives are going to be successful. And as Hildy referred to earlier, we're always very interested and concerned about this issue of sustainability. So if we want smart policing practices that test out to be true and innovative and helpful and cost-effective, well, then we want them sustained, and we don't want BJA to continue to have to fund them years into the future. So we have to think about organizational change in several, for several different reasons and in several different ways. And it's not necessarily always thinking that you have to radically change the organization to create a new program. But you may be talking about new structures within the agency. You may be talking about developing new capabilities to make sure that what you're doing is sustainable beyond the pilot program. And you may be working with your leadership to set new priorities and build the organization support mechanisms to support those new priorities. So let's go to the next slide, please. This is going to be a little bit redundant, but I don't think we can stress this point enough in smart policing. Change is going to happen. And I have observed this, and it's not just happening in policing, it's happening at the institutional level in other justice agencies, it's happening in the educational world, it's happening in the health field. Whatever we try and do, and whenever we try and make innovation in our respective fields, we exist, as we've said, in these very dynamic environments that are both internal and external. Police departments are very complex organizations, even if they're small ones. And anticipating change in a small organization still requires a fair amount of forethought and consideration of a lot of different issues, let alone what's happening external to your agency that can affect whether or not you're successful. So the leadership in these agencies, people who are responsible for innovations, have to deal with economic environments, political environments, leadership, changes in criminal behavior and criminal use of technology, changes in our use of technology, changes in the composition and characteristics of the community. Whenever we're trying to do anything, especially when we're trying to do anything that's new or different, we have to account for all of this that's going on around us, internal to our organizations and outside of our organizations. So smart policing initiatives that are successful are really incredibly flexible and dynamic and changeable. Repeating myself, but this is why we really have to focus on organizational change. So we talk about how to manage this change, how to initiate it, and how to see it through. I'm on the next slide there, Vivian. Providing a vision, having some openness and some open dialogue about this, about why this particular change or innovation has been selected and how other alternatives were considered and rejected, giving people at all levels of the organization an opportunity to discuss or chime in or have some input to what's going on, building momentum. We hear frequently from our smart policing sites the importance of communication. Not just one form of communication, not just having a letter or not just doing roll call trainings, but communicating what you're doing and the successes that you're having and the importance of what you're doing in several different ways, using several different media at several different levels in the organization. We found this to be incredibly important, and we found that most sites who initiate this work don't plan that extensively for facilitating organizational change in this way. Some of you may have heard Nola Joyce talk on this issue on a webinar a week or two ago. She'll be at the meeting in February as well. But she makes some very interesting points about change and sustainability, and that we have to be very strategic about that as well. Not all changes are that terribly important. On analysis, some of them will turn out to be not important at all. Some changes are important to institute for a limited amount of time. Some changes we want to infiltrate throughout the entire organization. So we have to be careful when we propose change or when we start to initiate change, exactly what kind of change we want, if it's really worth it, and how long we think it has to be in effect. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm not going to go into a long story about this, but we know that our organizations and any organization that's been in existence for any amount of time is going to resist change. It's just the nature of the beast. So our sites are well advised to anticipate these sources of resistance, to co-opt them if we have to include them in our education and communication processes, to engage them in participation and collaboration. We're very fond of using the term in-reach in smart policing. It's not just reaching out to external consistencies, but there are consistencies within your organizations that you need to reach out to. Sometimes we have to negotiate and compromise. Sometimes we have to co-opt some people into what we're doing. And sometimes we have to be a little bit more persistent and maybe even coercive. So who's anticipating some obstacles to change as they think about launching their smart policing initiative?
Yeah, Justin Reedy here, Phoenix site.
Hi, Justin.
Yeah, we have we'll be using body cameras, officers in the target area. 50 officers will be wearing body cameras and recording all police citizen interactions that occur on the street and in responding to domestic violence incidents. And
right.
we're dealing with some issues relating to officers becoming comfortable, union issues relating to officers wearing body cameras and activating them during all police citizen interactions. So it's going to be an interesting process to see how this evolves and how they become comfortable with this technology on a regular basis.
Interesting, interesting. There's actually some interesting literature on police adaptation of technological change. I'll be happy to share some of that with you.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Okay, I think actually I'm probably taking up a lot of time, so I want to move along pretty quickly here. I want to just talk for a few minutes about a couple case studies in research that we have found and that we've observed in some of our smart policing sites. So let's go to the first slide on Boston. Boston, with the help of Anthony Braga at Harvard University and actually Rutgers University, had a unique opportunity. They have 30 years of continuous data on gun crime and violence that's address-based. And so they were able to do a 30-year analysis of violence and gun crime in very small places. They call them micro places, like on street corners or on street segments. They found that this violence was incredibly stable over 30 years. They identified 13 locations where they were going to focus their violence reduction strategies, and they were able to build a comparative analysis with matched sites that were equally as violent that did not get smart policing treatment. And so briefly, they, through this comparative analysis, identified a 15% reduction in violent crime in the smart policing sites compared to the other sites, and that was actually fueled by a 19% reduction in street burglaries. So that's one example of comparative analysis that was done that identified some success with smart policing. Memphis selected a district called Old Allen Station, which was also, for the last 20 or 25 years, one of the most violent and one of the most problematical police districts in all of Memphis. They were able to identify several comparison areas, and this is kind of a preliminary analysis, but they've identified bona fide reductions in the targeted areas and mixed results in the non-targeted areas. Let's turn to Philadelphia just for a minute. Philadelphia was probably the most experimental of all the smart policing sites. They took data similar to what the Boston site used, and they identified over 80 microplaces in Philadelphia where very serious crime problems. They randomly assigned 4 different treatments to those places. So 20 places got foot patrol, 20 places got problem-oriented policing, 20 places got an offender-focused policing strategy, and 20 places got status quo, no new initiatives. And they ran those experiments for about 8 or 9 months and ended up concluding, of all those things, foot patrol was the most effective at reducing crime, statistically significant. So this is kind of a replication of some other studies that have been done around foot patrol, but it's really interesting confirmatory analysis that I think will be helpful to a lot of jurisdictions. Let me end my comments here. I want to turn it over to Hildy so we can talk a little bit about the upcoming meeting and then get to the website. Go ahead, Hildy.
Thank you, Chip. Next slide. Okay, next slide, Vivian. So you're coming to the national meeting. We hope all of the sites will be represented. We wanted to give you a feel for what to expect at the meeting and what to prepare for. So we won't be covering everything and all of the concepts of smart policing at this meeting, but it's a start, and we will be stressing those issues and those topics that we think are extremely important at this point in your initiative. So these are the concepts we'll be looking at: innovation in terms of law enforcement, innovation in terms of smart policing. We'll be talking about research partnerships and how research partnerships in smart policing really differ from research that's been conducted in previous initiatives. Sustainability, again, we'll be talking about this important issue, which we want you to consider up front in your initiative. We'll be talking about peer-to-peer support and giving you so many opportunities that you can take advantage of, learning from other sites, learning who your peers are that are doing similar or complementary work in other jurisdictions, and being able to talk with them throughout the next couple of years and benefiting from their experience as well. And then we'll be talking a lot about the support that you can receive from BJA and CNA as you go through your smart policing initiative. Next slide. Some of the outcomes we expect from this national meeting. So certainly for you to have a better understanding of smart policing, the expectations that BJA and CNA have of these initiatives, and many pathways to success, and how we'll be supporting those pathways. Certainly reviewing and revising your plans and strategies. We want you to bring with you your BJA proposal, any revised plans to your initiative that you have at this point, and you'll be considering those plans throughout the discussions at the meeting and have opportunities to, again, revise or change those based on what you've learned. Also, get a better understanding of how CNA, subject matter experts, BJA, and others can be of assistance to you in your smart policing initiative. And we want you to use the meeting as an opportunity to talk with and learn from others, as I've mentioned. Learn who those other sites are, those that might be able to be good people to talk with throughout the next couple of years as you're implementing smart policing, and getting that peer-to-peer interaction. And CNA can help facilitate those discussions as well. And we'll be talking about how we can do that. Next slide. So what do you need to prepare for the meeting? A couple of things. We'd like for you to review and then bring with you your site proposal that you got approved from BJA, as I mentioned earlier. Perhaps you want to review the webinars that we've discussed.
Middle of a webinar.
On the Smart Policing website. There's a number of webinars that we've put on over the last year, and you are welcome to look at those at your leisure. And then there are some suggested readings. You received these readings previous to this webinar, and if you didn't get a chance to read those before today, maybe you can do that before the meeting. That includes a CNA white paper on smart policing. On our website, you can see the summaries of all 32 smart policing sites, the old sites as well as the new sites. And you'll have a chance to review those summaries as well at the meeting while you're there. There's also a BJA fact sheet that gives you the background on smart policing. And then there's John Eck's article on external validity that's important to review and really understand, and we'll be discussing much more of the issues in that article at the upcoming meetings. So if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer those at this point, so that you can be well prepared for the meeting that's coming up within the next few weeks. So do you have any questions?
Yeah, this is Mark Russo from Kansas City. Do you have an agenda, meeting agenda with times, start times, end times for events, and start and end times for the entire meeting?
I can tell you now that it's going to start, well, let me pull that up. I think it starts at 8 o'clock or 8:30 on the first day.
Okay.
And just bear with me 1 second here, okay? Registration is 8 o'clock the first day. We'll go through to about 5 o'clock that day. We're going to arrange for kind of an informal get-together over dinner if any of the sites want to just sit and talk together at 6 o'clock. Then we begin at 8 o'clock the morning of the second day and end at about 4 o'clock. So pretty much 2 full days. We'll send out a detailed agenda very shortly. Okay, I'm just kind of tinkering with it a little bit, but it'll be ready soon.
Yeah, that helps just for travel planning purposes.
Sure, I understand. Yep.
So, what about the rooms? Are we supposed to go ahead and book the hotel rooms, or do you have them booked and we just pay for them?
I'm sure we have a block of rooms, but you should contact the hotel and pay for them, yes.
Yes, and we'll be sending more information about the hotel within the next day or two. We're working to finalize the contract with them and then get the website for you.
Yeah, please just bear with us. We're compressing about 2 months of planning into 2 weeks because of this process with the Justice Department. But there will very soon there'll be a web page at the hotel where you can go and register and book your rooms and things like that.
Okay, well, thank you, and we'll move to the last section of this webinar, which is about the Smart Policing website, and I'll turn it over to Vivian to talk about that.
Great. Thank you, Hildy. I'm going to take a few moments to talk briefly about the website. At this upcoming meeting, we'll provide a more in-depth presentation on the Smart Policing website. So as you can see here on the slide, the Smart Policing Initiative website can be found at www.smartpolicinginitiative.com. As Chip and Hildy noted, we highly encourage you to regularly use this website as a resource tool to collaborate with other SPI sites and the SPI community, and to request additional assistance if needed. As Hildy described earlier, the website has a number of useful resources, including reports, guides, and papers on smart policing practices, recordings of our webinars, technology in a data center, and overviews from our previous SPI meetings. If you have not already, we recommend that each of you go to our website, and on the front page you have the option to join our mailing list. This will allow you to stay updated with newly added resources and upcoming events. We send monthly email updates on our website, including our quarterly newsletter and invites to the webinar events. I also want to highlight that the website includes pages for each SPI site to share information on their specific project. If you check the website out now, you will see that each of your sites currently has a page. Some of them have already been populated by various SPI team members, while others are still blank and awaiting to be updated. On this page, your site has the liberty to add and update information, news, events, photographs, videos, anything that you would like to share pertaining to your SPI project. I sent an email out a few weeks ago requesting user access information for each of your sites. If you have not already contacted me to get user access, please send me an email with the name and email address of the persons who will be responsible for updating this information, and I will gladly help you get started. And lastly, I want to highlight our social media networks. We are actively involved in numerous networks, including Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. We encourage you to join these groups, follow the discussions, and participate. This is another excellent forum for sharing ideas and discussing issues related to smart policing with your fellow sites in the SPI community. The links for these social media sites can be found on the homepage of our SPI website. So we hope you take full advantage of these useful online resources. Again, we'll have a more in-depth presentation on this at our upcoming meeting. And please feel free to contact me if you have any questions regarding the website or our social media sites.
Okay. I think we've run over our time, so I apologize for that. I'll leave a moment for any last thoughts or questions. Okay, so let me just say this. If you have any trouble with the meeting logistics, contact Iris Gonzalez or Vivian Chu at CNA. And we do have an email address, spi@cna.org. So it's fairly easy to contact us if you need to. But in all seriousness, we know it's going to be a little bit of a rush to get things ready. So if you do have questions or issues with logistics, please contact us, and we'll work with you as best as we can. We thank you for your attention today. I'm going to remind you to please pay attention to the session evaluation that comes out, and look forward to seeing everybody in a couple of weeks. Okay? Hildy, thank you. Vivian, thank you.